100 years ago, in 1924, Mallory and Irvine vanished just 800 feet from the Everest summit with a camera that could rewrite mountaineering history. In 2024, the glaciar Rongbuk melt revealed a bota and remains linked to Irvine, found by Jimmy Chin and the NatGeo team. But what if hidden provas prove they reached the top first? What did the Chinese spot in 1960? Why is the camera still missing? On the centenario of 1924, we dive into Everest secrets NatGeo isn't fully telling. Watch till the end for the shocking truth. But before we unravel this mystery, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. In 1924, two men climbed into the clouds above Mount Everest and never came back. For 100 years, the world asked the same question. Did they reach the summit before they died? Did George Mallory and Andrew Irvine stand on the roof of the world 3 decades before Edmund Hillary, only to vanish into legend? The mountain kept its secrets, the snow buried the truth, and the years turned into decades, then into a century. But in 2024, something emerged from the ice, a boot, and inside that boot, a foot that had been frozen in time for exactly 100 years. One climber, interviewed after the discovery, said it simply. He said he looked at that boot, still laced, still holding what remained of a man who once dreamed of glory, and he felt like he was shaking hands with a ghost. This is the story of that boot, of two boots. Actually, one found in 1999, one found in 2024, and together, they may finally answer the question that has haunted mountaineering for a century. Did Mallory and Irvine make it? And if they did, why did the world never know? The last climb context of 1924, 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, the most debated minute in Everest history. Did he abandon the summit? The morning of June 8, 1924, broke cold and clear over the north face of Mount Everest at Camp 6, perched at 26,800 feet, higher than any human dwelling on Earth, too. British climbers prepared for what they believed would be the defining moment of their lives. George Lee Mallory was 37 years old, a schoolteacher, a war veteran, a man who had already attempted Everest twice and failed. When a journalist once asked him why he wanted to climb the mountain, Mallory gave an answer that would echo through history: because it's there. But those 3 words hid a deeper truth. Mallory was obsessed. His letters home revealed a man who felt the weight of expectation crushing him. A colleague who knew him well later recalled that Mallory spoke of Everest the way some men speak of a woman they cannot forget. He said Mallory needed that summit, the way a drowning man needs air. It wasn't ambition anymore, the colleague admitted. It was something closer to madness. Beside Mallory that morning stood Andrew Irvine, Sandy to his friends. He was just 22, an engineering student from Oxford, strung as an ox, with a gift for fixing the unreliable oxygen equipment that the expedition depended on. He had almost no high-altitude experience. He had never climbed anything like Everest, and yet Mallory chose him. Years later, other expedition members would seriously question that choice. One of them, Noel Odell, even admitted in a private letter that he never understood why Mallory picked Sandy over more experienced climbers. He suspected Mallory wanted someone who wouldn't argue with him, someone who would follow him anywhere, even to their deaths. At 12:50 that afternoon, Odell was climbing far below when the clouds parted for just a moment. He looked up and saw 2 tiny figures, high on the ridge, moving steadily toward the summit. One of them appeared to be climbing a rock step, one of the great obstacles near the very top. Then the clouds closed again. No one ever saw them alive after that. The mountain swallowed them whole, and for 75 years, no trace of either man was found. But the mountain does not keep everything forever. Ice shifts, snow melts, and eventually, the dead begin to surface. The discovery of 1999, Mallory's body 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock. On May 1st, 1999, a team of climbers known as the Mallory and Irvine Research Expedition set out with a singular purpose: to find the bodies. They knew roughly where to look. In 1975, a Chinese climber named Wang Bao had reportedly stumbled upon a body at 26,760 feet, what he described, through translation, as an Old English dead. Wang died in an avalanche the very next day, before he could lead anyone back to the site. His account remained tantalizing, frustrating, incomplete. The 1999 team searched for days. The altitude was brutal, above 26,000 feet. The human body begins to die. Every step was agony, every breath burned. And then, on a steep snow terrace, expedition member Conrad Anka saw something pale against the grey rock. It was a body. It was George Mallory. He lay face down, arms extended as if frozen in the act of trying to stop a fall. His back was exposed to the sky, the skin bleached white by decades of sun and wind. His right leg was badly broken, the tibia shattered. His climbing rope was still tied around his waist, and the rope had snapped, frayed and broken, as though it had been pulled to its limit and beyond. One member of the discovery team later recalled the moment with visible emotion. He said he knelt down beside the body and looked at Mallory's hands. The fingers were still clenched into the gravel, frozen mid, as if he had tried to hold on. The climber whispered, as if he had fought until the very last second. They searched the body carefully. In Mallory's pockets, they found letters, a pocket knife, snow goggles, and an altimeter. They found a tin of beef life. They found personal effects that his family had waited 75 years to see again. But they did not find the one thing that could have proven everything. They did not find the camera. Mallory and Irvine had carried a Kodak vest pocket camera with them, a small device capable of surviving the cold. If that camera still held film, and if that film could be developed, it might contain photographs from the summit. Proof, at last, that the British reached the top of Everest before anyone else. The camera was not on Mallory's body, which meant only one thing. Irvine ad Italiano. Mallory's boots, the evidence of the fall 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock. When the 1999 expedition examined Mallory's remains, they focused on every detail that might reveal how he died, and one of the most telling pieces of evidence came from his feet. Mallory was wearing hobnailed leather boots. The standard climbing footwear of the 1920s were not the insulated high-tech boots of modern mountaineering. They were essentially modified hiking boots, with metal studs hammered into the soles for grip on ice. They offered almost no protection against the cold. Frostbite was not a risk. It was a certainty, but it was the condition of the boots that drew attention. The right boot showed significant damage. The leather was scraped and torn along the outer edge, consistent with a violent impact or a prolonged slide down rocky terrain. The hobnails on that side were worn down, some missing entirely, as if the foot had been dragged across stone at high speed. A mountaineering forensics expert who analyzed the boots years later explained what this suggested. He said the wear pattern told a story of a long, uncontrolled fall, not a quick tumble, but a sustained slide, possibly hundreds of feet, during which Mallory was conscious and trying to stop himself. The expert paused before continuing. He said, the damage to the boot matched the damage to the body, the broken leg, the rope that snapped. Mallory fell, he concluded, and he fell hard. But here is where the mystery deepens. The rope around Mallory's waist was not simply broken. It showed signs of a clean fracture under tension, the kind that occurs when two climbers are roped together. One falls, and the force is too great for the rope to hold. This meant Mallory was almost certainly still connected to Irvine when the fall began. A veteran climber who studied the evidence offered a grim theory. He believed the two men were descending together, likely in the dark or in a whiteout, when one of them slipped. The rope pulled tight. The other was yanked off his feet. They fell together, tumbling down the north face, until the rope snapped and they were separated. Mallory's body stopped where it was found. Irvine kept falling further, deeper, into the void below. For years, this was the accepted narrative. A shared fall, a broken rope, two bodies separated by gravity and fate. But the 2024 discovery would challenge that story, because Irvine's boot, when it finally emerged, told a different tale. 100 years ago, Andrew Irvine and George Mallory vanished into the mists of Mount Everest, leaving behind one of history's greatest mountaineering mysteries. Did they reach the summit before their fateful end? Now, a century later, the mountain has offered a clue. In the spring of 2024, a boot, complete with a foot still inside, emerged from the shifting ice of a glacier. Sewn into the sock was a name tag, A.C. Irvine. The discovery sent shockwaves through the climbing world, but the mystery only deepens. The team that found it reported it was near the Chinese base camp, far from where Irvine was last seen. Another expedition claims they saw it much higher up the mountain years ago. Was the boot moved by the glacier, or is there more to this story? The mountain holds its secrets close, but sometimes it lets one go. Follow for more incredible stories from the world's highest peaks. In 2024, exactly 100 years after Mallory and Irvine vanished, something finally emerged from Everest's ice. A boot, old leather, hobnailed, from another era. And inside that boot was the detail that changed everything. A sock label, faded but still readable, bearing a name that had been missing from the mountain for a century. A.C. Irvine. Andrew Cumming Irvine had finally surfaced, not as a theory, not as a rumor, but as physical evidence. But this is where the story becomes fragile, and where you have to be careful. And that uncertainty matters, because it's exactly how myths are born. So here's what stays solid in every telling. The boot was documented, and the identification was tied to Irvine's name. After 100 years, the mountain gave the world one undeniable thing: proof that Irvine was there, and proof that something of him survived. And the moment his name re-entered the story, the biggest question returned like a punch to the chest. Where is the camera? Mallory didn't have it when his body was found in 1999. The expedition searched. They catalogued what they could. No Kodak vest pocket, which means the one object that could answer the century-old debate. The one thing that could prove whether they reached the summit would almost certainly have been with Irvine. But so far, public statements have been careful. They confirm the boot. They confirm the name. They do not confirm the one item everyone wants. And that silence creates two possibilities, both unsettling: either the camera is gone, destroyed by time and ice, or it isn't. And someone, somewhere, is choosing not to say what they know. Did George Mallory and Andrew Irvine reach the summit of Everest in 1924, nearly 30 years before Hillary and Tenzing? For a century? That's been the big question. But recent discoveries are shifting the focus from whether they summited to how they died. For decades, the common theory was a tragic joint fall. When Mallory's body was found in 1999, he had a severe rope jerk injury around his waist, suggesting he and Irvine were roped together, and one of them fell, pulling the other down. This seemed to be the final word on their fate. But fast forward to 2024. Irvine's boot has just been found, remarkably far from where Mallory's boot was discovered. Why were the remains and gear so separated if they fell together? This new evidence challenges the joint fall theory. Adding to the puzzle is the ice axe, found in 1933 below the first step. This suggests they might have taken a different, lower traverse route, avoiding the treacherous second step altogether. With Irvine's boot now located, the search for his body and the crucial camera he carried intensifies. Finding that camera could finally solve the mystery of Everest's first conquerors. For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? The controversial second step: does the ice axe indicate an alternative route? For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? But the discovery of both boots, one in 1999, one in 2024, allows us to ask a different question. How did they die? And did they die together? The traditional theory, based on Mallory's body and the broken rope, suggested a joint fall. Two men, roped together, tumbling down the mountain until the rope snapped. But the 2024 discovery complicates this narrative. Irvine's boot was found far from Mallory's body, not just laterally, but vertically. For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? But the discovery of both boots, one in 1999, one in 2024, allows us to ask a different question. How did they die? And did they die together? The traditional theory, based on Mallory's body and the broken rope, suggested a joint fall. Two men, roped together, tumbling down the mountain until the rope snapped. But the 2024 discovery complicates this narrative. Irvine's boot was found far from Mallory's body, not just laterally, but vertically. For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? The controversial second step: does the ice axe indicate an alternative route? For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? But the discovery of both boots, one in 1999, one in 2024, allows us to ask a different question. How did they die? And did they die together? The traditional theory, based on Mallory's body and the broken rope, suggested a joint fall. Two men, roped together, tumbling down the mountain until the rope snapped. But the 2024 discovery complicates this narrative. Irvine's boot was found far from Mallory's body, not just laterally, but vertically. For decades, the prevailing question about Mallory and Irvine has been simple: did they reach the summit? But the discovery of both boots, one in 1999, one in 2024, allows us to ask a different question. How did they die? And did they die together? The traditional theory, based on Mallory's body and the broken rope, suggested a joint fall. Two men, roped together, tumbling down the mountain until the rope snapped. But the 2024 discovery complicates this narrative. Irvine's boot was found far from Mallory's body, not just laterally, but vertically. Glacial movement over a century could account for some of this distance, but not all of it. If the two men fell together and separated only when the rope broke, their remains should have been found in closer proximity, unless they weren't together when the fall began. A revisionist theory, gaining traction since 2024, proposes an alternative sequence of events. According to this theory, Mallory and Irvine reached a critical decision point high on the mountain, possibly at the infamous second step, a 90-foot rock cliff that blocks the route to the summit. In 1924, this obstacle would have been nearly impossible to climb with the equipment available. Nowadays, mountaineers use ladders made by the Chinese, but it wasn't always that way. There was only rock, ice, and the desperate ambition of two men who had come too far to turn back. One mountaineering historian, analyzing the evidence, proposed a theory that challenges the traditional narrative. He suggested that Mallory may have attempted the second step alone, leaving Irvine below to wait. If Mallory succeeded, he would return for his partner. If he failed, Irvine would at least be spared the risk. According to this theory, Mallory did succeed, at least in climbing the step. But somewhere above, on the final push to the summit or on the descent, something went wrong. He fell, and when he fell, Irvine, waiting below, still roped to his partner, was pulled off the mountain too. But here's the crucial difference. Irvine may have fallen from a different location, at a different angle, down a different route. This would explain why their remains ended up so far apart. An ice axe found, in 1933, lying on the ridge at approximately 27,760 feet, adds another layer to the mystery. The axe was almost certainly Irvine's. It was found above where he would have waited if the theory is correct. This suggests that at some point, Irvine moved higher, whether he was following Mallory, or trying to help him after the fall began, or simply continuing toward the summit on his own. We cannot know. What we do know is this: two men climbed into the clouds, and neither came back. And the mountain, even now, has not revealed all its secrets. The question of concealment: did National Geographic hide Irvine, and what was removed in 1975? The discovery of Irvine's boot, in 2024, was announced by National Geographic, with considerable The documentary film crew, affiliated with the organization, shared footage and photographs with the world. The find was hailed as one of the most significant in mountaineering history, but almost immediately, voices began to question the narrative. Why was only a boot found? If the glacier had released part of Irvine's remains, where was the rest of the body? And more importantly, where was the camera? Some critics accused National Geographic of selective disclosure. They pointed out that the organization had substantial financial interest in the Mallory-Irvine mystery. A definitive answer, proof that the British did or did not reach the summit first, would resolve a question that had generated documentaries, books, and expeditions for decades. The mystery, in other words, was valuable. The solution might be less so. A mountaineering journalist who covered the 2024 discovery later wrote with unconcealed frustration. He said the announcement raised more questions than it answered. He wondered why the full GPS coordinates were not released. He asked why independent researchers were not invited to examine the find, and he posed the uncomfortable question that others were thinking. Was something being hidden? The 1975 connection remains the most troubling element. Rongbuk, his sighting of an Old English dead, occurred during a Chinese expedition that officially reported nothing unusual. Wang mentioned it only privately, to a Japanese climber, the night before he died. And in the decades since, multiple sources have suggested that the Chinese may have found more than they publicly admitted. An elderly Chinese climber, speaking anonymously in an interview conducted years ago, hinted at a troubling possibility. He said there were things that happened on the mountain that were never written in official reports. He said objects were sometimes taken and not returned. When pressed for specifics, he would only shake his head. Some secrets, he whispered, are kept not because they are shameful, but because they are too valuable to share. If Irvine's camera was recovered in the 1970s or 1980s, and if the film was developed, the results could rewrite history. They could prove that Mallory and Irvine summited Everest in 1924, 29 years before Hillary and Tenzing. Or they could prove the opposite, that the British turned back, that they failed, that their legend was built on hope rather than achievement. Either answer would be significant. And either answer, it seems, someone may have decided the world was not ready to hear. Did Mallory summit first? His pocket proves nothing, or everything. When Mallory's body was searched in 1999, the team hoped to find definitive evidence of his fate. They found many things, but they did not find the one item that Mallory's family said he carried with him: a photograph of his wife, Ruth. Mallory had told Ruth, before he left for Everest, that he planned to leave her photograph on the summit if he reached it. A private ritual, a declaration of love placed on the highest point on earth. The photograph was not in his pockets. For those who believe Mallory reached the summit, this absence is proof. He left the photo at the top, They argue he achieved his dream. He died on the way down, triumphant. But for skeptics, the absence proves nothing. The photo could have fallen out during the fall. It could have been lost to the elements. It could have been taken by someone who found the body before 1999. A historian who has spent decades studying the evidence offered a measured perspective. She said the missing photograph is tantalizing, but it's not conclusive. You can interpret it to support whatever narrative you prefer. The summit believers see proof. The skeptics see coincidence. She paused before adding something more personal. She said she hoped, truly hoped, that Mallory made it. That he stood on top, if only for a moment, before the mountain took him. But hope, she admitted, is not history. The 2024 discovery of Irvine's boot has reignited these debates with fresh intensity. If more of Irvine's remains are found, and particularly if the camera is recovered, we may finally have an answer. But the glacier is vast, and it moves slowly, and it does not give up its dead on anyone's schedule. Some things remain buried not because they are lost, but because they are not yet ready to be found. 100 years. That's how long Mallory and Irvine have been on the mountain. 100 years of snow and silence, 100 years of questions without answers. And perhaps that's fitting. Everest does not owe us certainty. The men who climb it understand this. They accept that the mountain may take everything, their strength, their fingers, their lives, and give nothing in return. Not glory, not proof, not even their bodies, return to the people who love them. Mallory's wife, Ruth, never remembered. She waited for news that never came, and then she waited for remains that took 75 years to surface. In her final years, those who knew her said she still spoke of George as if he might walk through the door at any moment, as if the telegram had been wrong, as if the mountain might somehow give him back. It didn't, but it gave us something else. 2 boots. One worn and broken, its hobnails ground down by a desperate slide across stone, the other frozen and preserved, emerging from the ice a century later with a name embroidered inside, a name that belonged to a young man who should have had a lifetime ahead of him. These boots cannot tell us if Mallory and Irvine reached the summit. They cannot show us what the camera recorded. They cannot answer the question that has haunted mountaineering for 100 years. But they can tell us something else. They can tell us that 2 men climbed as high as their courage and their bodies would allow. They can tell us that they did not turn back, when turning back might have saved them. They can tell us that they chose the summit over safety, legend over life, and perhaps, in the end, that is enough. An old climber, interviewed late in his life about the Mallory-Irvine mystery, offered words that have stayed with many who heard them. He said it didn't matter to him whether they made it. What mattered was that they tried, that they looked at the impossible and said yes. That kind of courage, he whispered, doesn't need a summit to prove it. It proves itself. George Mallory and Andrew Irvine are still on Everest. Their boots have come home. But the men who wore them belong to the mountain now, and perhaps they always did. If you want to hear more stories like this, mysteries from history, questions that have waited a century for answers, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told.